John, your heart's just not in it anymore. Hello and welcome to Rutted Review of the Day, and it is the day after Halloween, but we have already bought our ticket, hopped on the train, and it started heading down the tracks. We are riding this one to the end, folks, and we continue today with Halloween 2, 1981, Hospital Boogaloo. This one was, I've never really cared for it a whole lot, and the more I research into why and the more I watch it over and over again, as I tend to do, the more it just kind of solidifies, my stance on it and why. In this case, John Carpenter has stepped down from the directorial role. He really didn't even want to do this. And that's kind of, there was in my opening, the little teaser there, it's kind of the ultimate feeling that I got about this movie after watching it is that nobody's heart was really in this anymore. At no point do I think that anybody, except for possibly Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance. But aside from that, I don't think anybody really felt like they were bringing their all to the project. Everybody had their own different idea of what they wanted it to be. Everybody had their own different, idea of what Halloween franchise should be and what this next installment should be, and what made the first one great. The problem is the first one, kicked off a lot of the slasher momentum of the late 70s and early 80s, even continuing on through the 80s. By kicking that off and, coming up with, Friday the 13th and a lot of the Scream Queen series, it influenced the motion picture industry. And that influence was trickling down into a lot of these movies that were being made that had a lot of blood, guts, and gore. And like I said in my review of the first movie, it didn't have a whole lot of that. A lot of it was implied. A lot of it was suspenseful. A lot of it was thrilling, but not a whole lot of blood, guts, and gore on the screen. And now we're in a situation of they're releasing this new movie 3 years later. The impact of the first one has reached the marketplace, and audiences have flocked to the blood, guts, and gore. So now what do? Do you continue on with the tone of the first film, or do you follow where the industry has been heading, even though you were the one to kind of, at least, kick it off with your inspiration? Certainly, I've already addressed that it's not the first slasher. But even so, it did inspire a wave of slashers. And, as far as that conflict goes, that's ultimately, it was undecided, and that's ultimately the conflict that kind of came to the screen there. John Carpenter felt like he wasn't fairly compensated for the first film, so he thought that maybe this was a way to kind of financially make up for that by at least attaching himself to this project, so he begrudgingly did it. He wrote and produced it, and apparently he did it by, getting through it by a six-pack of beer every time he sat down to write. So this was just not a passion project anymore. This was not something that anybody really had their heart into. Anybody could really agree on what it was supposed to be. And ultimately, I think the entirety of the project suffered for it. I'm amazed they even pushed out a finished project. This had several reshoots that John Carpenter did go back and do because he felt like the blood, guts, and gore was a necessary component these days. The director that was attached to the project, of Rick Rosenthal, felt differently, so John Carpenter had to do the reshoots. Just a huge mess. But they did manage to turn out a movie, and it was a part of the Halloween franchise, and it's not the worst of the bunch. I will say that. It's just coming on the tails of the original 1978 Halloween movie. It probably couldn't hold a candle to it in the first place, but having such a mess of production and a mess of spirit, I think definitely did not do it any service. So in this movie, we basically pick up right where we left off. Jamie Lee Curtis, actually there's a bit of overlap where it kind of has the last few scenes of the first film lead into where this one is going on through, and we're still back in Haddonfield, Illinois. Jamie Lee Curtis fighting the Shape, Michael Myers, and continuing on with that. Basically, she gets taken to the hospital, and Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis, along with the local police department, are on a manhunt for Michael Myers. And of course, yeah, okay, I'm going to keep this spoiler free. Everybody knows the story, but I'm still going to keep it spoiler free. So, moving on. But that's ultimately kind of the point, is Michael Myers is on the loose and has survived the events of the first film. He's being hunted down, tracked down by the police and Dr. Loomis, while Laurie Strode is being cared for at the hospital. And while Dr. Loomis and the sheriff and so forth are all kind of parading around town trying to find him, Michael Myers has instead targeted the hospital. He's still going after Laurie Strode, unbeknownst to local law enforcement. So the hospital comes under siege, and that's basically where a lot of this movie is set as far as the slasher kills and so forth, is the hospital staff getting the brunt of it. And that's ultimately, this does reveal the family connection that is so widely known that I don't mind at least saying that, and it does get retconned later on, but even so, it does establish that Laurie Strode is Michael Myers' sister and so on. And that's ultimately, I mentioned in the first review of the first Halloween movie just yesterday that one of the things I really loved about the Michael Myers character is the fact that it's simple. And I mean, whereas a lot of sequels to franchises like Nightmare on Elm Street, turned into, his mother was a nun trapped in with insane patients and was raped by a million insane people. Friday the 13th just goes completely off the rails, even going so far as to be electrocuted with from the grave, and then all sorts of demon, and this one keeps it simple. And I think that this is kind of the natural progression of a sequel, is to kind of do a little bit more backstory developing. If you just do more of the same of what you did in the first one, then you're basically just repeating yourself. You need to provide a little bit more context, a little bit more storyline. And I think that they did that while also still keeping the concept of the Michael Myers character simple, which I do enjoy. And this is, I think, I'm going to need a refresher. As I continue watching the series, I'm going to get that refresher, but I think that that's about as complicated as the Michael Myers character gets, is him basically in search of one family connection or another, and then anybody that gets caught in that way gets brutally slaughtered. I think that that's about as complicated as it gets, and that's one thing that I really love about it. I'm going to find out if I'm wrong as I continue on with this franchise reviews. But I'm going to go ahead and throw up all the scores here. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And I think that, honestly, the passion that was absent from this film affected everything across the board. Certainly the intention, certainly the plot. The acting, I thought, was actually still pretty good as far as our two main characters of Dr. Loomis and Laurie Strode, Donald Pleasance and Jamie Lee Curtis, respectively. I think that they really did bring their all to the screen again, and hats off to them for that. If I felt like that, their passion mimicked the passion of Rick Rosenthal or John Carpenter, and they were basically just begrudgingly there, trying to get their paycheck, phoning it in, okay, it's a sequel, it would have felt, this movie would have been just absolutely terrible. And the fact is, it's not terrible. It's just definitely not as good as the first one. And I would just put it solidly in the okay category. If this was a if this was a self-contained movie and just released as Hospital Massacre, then I would think that this would be an average slasher movie. Which, as part like I said, coming on the heels of the 1978 Halloween movie is not high praise, but it's not bad. The technical. Here's the problem with the technical is, although this one did have more blood, guts, and gore, and the special effects were more prevalent on the screen, the camera work and the editing were not nearly as good, I don't believe, as the first film. And it's not, I don't know, is it unfair to compare it constantly to the first one? I don't think so. I mean, it's a sequel. It's coming on the heels of, and it still has a lot of the same people attached to it, even begrudgingly. I think it's a fair comparison. But even so, it was okay. It was okay, but it wasn't great as far as the editing and the camera work. And the score was also a little disappointing. There's something so simple and haunting about the single piano key clinks as opposed to the electronic synthesizer chord progression that this movie kind of adopted as far as the Halloween score that's just so iconic. I just did not like it as much, although I will say that the opening credits with the pumpkin revealing the skull inside, that was pretty cool. But the score I couldn't get behind either. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons why watch one of my really early videos that I started a little over a year ago, and I did not have a technical category. Instead, I had, I think, an effects category or special effects category. And this is one of the reasons why I changed that to technical, is because I wanted to include things like the cinematography, the score, the editing, the technical prowess of the film in its entirety. And I felt like I was taking points away from movies that weren't special effects heavy, and I felt that that was unfair if that's not what it was supposed to be. So that's why I changed it to technical. So even though this one did have more special effects, did have more blood, guts, and gore, I do feel like on a technical level, it did suffer way more than the first film. So I find this one just a little bit more visually shocking, I will say, in terms of the special effects that were on the screen, but they somehow just didn't have nearly as much impact. The camera work did so much with the first movie that as far as shocking elements and terrifying elements, that's really... I'm not going to say that John Carpenter made a mistake by wanting more of the special effects and more of the blood on screen. I'm just saying that it needed to also work on the same level as the first film. If you were going to still have that Michael Myers just barely seen in the shadows, or just the absolute haunting imagery of Laurie crying and Michael Myers laying down, supposedly defeated in the background, and then just lifting himself up, turning his head just in such a robotic fashion, those are the kind of things that really make the movies pop. And that's just coming down to all the technical issues, the director issue, here's how we're going to film it, here's how we're going to frame it, here's where the focus is going to be, and here's how I'm going to tell the actor how I want him to be moving. Things like that. That's important. And that's what was absent from this movie. So if you're going to have all the special effects and so forth, that's perfectly fine. Bring it on. I am a horror movie fan, but don't leave out the magic that made the first movie so special. And ultimately, that's what I feel like Halloween 2, 1981 did. So that should about do it for this review. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you Monday as I continue picking up this franchise reviews with Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. I'll probably be doing a few odd things this weekend, maybe a coffee and contemplation vlog or a top blank list. I don't know. We'll have to see. But that should about do it for today. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe. And if you want to support me further, my Patreon and my merchandise storefront links are below. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.